Are you tired of the cookie-cutter approach to education that's stuck in the last century? Are you seeking a win-win situation where your family thrives, your kid's education is revolutionary, and you still get to chase your own dreams? Welcome to Unschooled Unleashed. Unlock your child's genius. I'm your host, Matthew Jarecki, an unapologetic rebel dad and promoter of what many consider to be educational anarchy. You know the world isn't going to be won by those that just toe the line. It's the innovators, the visionaries, and the resilient spirits that are going to thrive. Our mission here is to forge those world changers within our very homes with less stress, energy, and time. Unschooled Unleashed starts now. Welcome back to another fantastic episode of Unschooled Unleashed. I'm your host, Matthew Jarecki, and today we're going to talk about the education system and its one-size-fits-all approach, how the education system values conformity over individuality, and how that drives me nuts. We're going to talk about the history, dive into some of the problems with the one-size-fits-all approach, and I'm going to make an argument for how unschooling is a good and possibly superior, in my opinion, absolutely superior alternative to this one-size-fits-all approach. So with that, let's dive in. Today we're going to talk about how the education system is failing our children by using its one-size-fits-all approach. I think about how ridiculous this is quite a bit, and I think a lot of people would agree if I gave an analogy, and that analogy might be, what if I were to require every third grader in the entire United States to master the trumpet? That's the only musical instrument anyone will use, regardless of interest, regardless of abilities, regardless of preference. And me as the expert chose the trumpet because I am the expert and chose third grade because I am the expert. Yet you could have chosen any instrument in any grade, but that's what we chose and we're the experts, so you must agree with it and move forward. I think people would think that was pretty absurd, yet that's what we do with within the education system. By and large, you really don't have a choice. It's a one-size-fits-all system that promises maybe fairness and opportunity, yet I would argue it delivers conformity and unneeded stress from everyone. So today we're going to explore how the model fails, how unschooling provides a better alternative, and how you can embrace a more individualized approach for your family. But first, let's jump in to the history of the one-size-fits-all education system. Many of you John Taylor Gatto fans out there probably already know this, but our education system here in the United States has Industrial Revolution roots. Schools were designed to create obedient workers, not independent thinkers. In fact, when they modeled this system, the American system, after the Prussian system, it was designed to, quote-unquote, tame the American spirit. We were too independent to be factory workers. We wanted people to show up, and when I say we, I mean the industrialists like Rockefeller, Carnegie. They wanted people to show up to the factories and do what they were told. We wanted them there at a certain time, to leave at a certain time, to change machines at certain times. That's why we would use a bell to signify time to change machines, that type of thing. So they set up the education system to model a factory. So if you want to know more about that, read the book Underground History of American Education by John Taylor Gatto. Your eyes will probably be opened. Now, in the modern day, despite the evolution within our society and how things change, we're not in the United States mainly an industrial economy. School still focuses on maintaining compliance, schedules, and standardized learning. One size fits all. And really what I think of it is a conveyor belt education. Kids are moved through grades whether they've mastered material or not, creating potential gaps and definitely creating boredom for a lot of kids, or feelings of fear if they're behind, because the experts chose an arbitrary age in which to learn something. Now, some stuff we could agree should probably be learned by a certain age in order to be successful, but that does not mean they are quote unquote behind. Some kids learn to read later than others. Some kids potty trained later than others, right? I mean, it's just the way some kids learn to ride a bike earlier or later than others. It just is independent of the average. Things are going to vary, and I think we should embrace that and not make everyone the same. I imagine a better way. I imagine an education model where kids can dive deeply into what fascinates them, what they're interested in, and then learn it at their own pace. And I would argue that they would retain it better, they would learn it faster, and it would be with a lot less stress. Moving on, let's talk about why the traditional education system fails children by using this one-size-fits-all approach. So one of my values is individuality, right? I like individualism to a point, probably to a fault. And what schools want is conformity. So it ignores that individuality that I highly value. Kids have unique learning styles, whether visual, auditory, hands-on, more, right? But traditional schools cater to only one or two of these approaches. I don't think that's a good approach. I think we also are in this comparison culture, if you will, meaning we're comparing one student to another, when really we should be focusing on comparing the children to their previous self. I think that's the only healthy way to do it. I know that's what they teach adults to do, is not compare yourself to others, sitting on Instagram scrolling or comparing yourself to, the Joneses who live next door. If you've ever heard that phrase, keeping up with the Joneses, meaning you're comparing yourself to someone else and trying to keep up with them. No, we're taught the healthy way is to compare yourself with your previous self. Have you made growth? Yet, that's not what we're doing in schools. We're using grades, we're using rankings and test scores to pit kids against each other. And I think this leads to anxiety and eventually will lead to burnout and stress, and depression, and all the nasty things that can come with comparing yourself to others. And I think there's an emotional cost to this. I think many kids leave school feeling inadequate and disconnected from just the natural love of learning. I think they come, when I talk about learning, when I used to be an educator, I would talk about learning something new and people would go, oh my gosh, they would just groan and say, I hate school. I hate learning. I hate this. I hate that. And it's like, my gosh, we did a number on you. Learning should be loved. I don't think we want to have people leaving the education system saying, I never want to learn anything again. Yet we hear that over and over again. And anecdotally, I've talked to a lot of college graduates who say that I can't stand school. I did this as a means to an end. That's it. I hate learning. Wow. That's certainly not a great path for the future of our society in the United States. Moving on. Before I move on, I think there is a real cost to that as well. Whether anecdotal or statistical, I think there's mental health struggles that are linked to this type of pressure that we put on people by trying to conform them and make them learn. So I think that that's another way we also set up our kids to fail. All right, moving on. I believe that unschooling can actually be a solution, a valid solution. What we're really talking about when we're talking about unschooling is child-led learning, interest-based learning. So they get to pick what they want to learn, and they're going to do it based off their interests, right? Oftentimes, there's going to be some kind of necessity to learning something. Like, well, if you want to save up for that PlayStation 5, you're going to have to learn math and do the addition yourself, learn how to save and budget, all these things. The necessity of learning those things all of a sudden becomes relevant in their world, and all of a sudden they're interested in it. This is what I'm referring to. But it just doesn't stop there. There's plenty of examples. Some kids are just interested in certain things, like my kids are interested in math. They're interested in history. They're interested in coding, all these different things that they get to dive into, story writing, reading books, all these things. Also, with unschooling is learning through just regular life. They can learn from everyday tasks like going to the store. They can learn about, we could just talk with them as we do things like, why did we choose this brand over this brand? Well, this brand's a little bit healthier. Here, let me teach you a little bit about health. And then we go back and we cook it. And we teach them how to essentially be a functional adult by teaching them how to feed themselves. Of course, age appropriate. But these are things that aren't taught in school necessarily. And I think we're doing them a disservice. I also think parents have a role in unschooling. I would love to believe in radical unschooling, and I'm sure it's appropriate for some kids. But I don't subscribe 100% to that philosophy. In fact, I believe we should be doing something I call intentional unschooling, where a parent has a much more involved role in unschooling. And if you want to learn more about that, please go back and listen to that episode. But essentially, the message is we provide exposure and resources and the structure in order for our kids to be successful. So that might take the form of quiet time in the evening before they go to bed, and you just give them books. And maybe it's you give them books that you think would be beneficial for them, like maybe a history book or something like that. I gave my kids the U.S. Constitution because they were into that for a while, and here you go ahead, read this. And they did, oddly. You would think kids would avoid civics studying, but my kids were into it, and they can talk about the U.S. Constitution probably better than most adults in the United States. Could be wrong about that, but I would venture to say probably. We're, in this role, I think we are to guide children. I don't think we just abstain from their education. I think we should guide them, point them towards what we think is important. So I think the parental role is very active in unschooling, yet I don't think it causes near as much stress as traditional homeschooling or the traditional education system, where you're just forcing your kids to do worksheets every time they get home instead of, connecting with you and having a good time, building the relationship, which is where I think it's probably most valuable. That time is most valuable because guess what? The average school-aged kid doesn't get very much time with their parents anymore. And then on the weekends, that's when their parents are mowing the lawn and doing their thing because they had to work all week, and I think it's a disaster. So I think unschooling can be a solution. Moving on, the science behind personalized learning. So if we're doing a one-size-fits-all education system, then you won't get anything personalized, right? Unless it's an exception. With unschooling, we're able to personalize that learning, and interest-driven learning has better retention, at least according to the science. Neuroscience has shown when kids are genuinely interested or curious about a topic, they actually learn better. And there's also a role in play. Play isn't just fun, it's actually a powerful learning tool that teaches problem solving and creativity. So one of the things we do with our children is allow free play, especially in the morning, because that's where that time is often best spent. Also, they get out a lot of energy, and especially young boys need to get out a lot of energy before they can actually sit down. And I think, and I'm only speculating here, I don't know for sure, but I would say if I was a 10-year-old kid who wanted to play and do stuff, I'm just a normal kid who wants to climb trees, that if I weren't able to sit still, I would probably focus on whatever the teacher's talking about for the 7 hours or 8 hours I'm in school, then I would get a diagnosis of some sort. Not good. I think we want to focus on making our kids mentally healthy, so I think that makes it imperative for our kids to enjoy learning. They'll retain it longer, and they're more likely to seek out challenges and problem solve and all that stuff if we do interest-based learning. And you can look into a lot of the neuroscience behind that if you would like. Moving on, I'm going to talk about how age does not tell us if kids are ready. And in a one-size-fits-all approach, age determines everything, right? You have to stay on point as far as your age. So there's this myth of grade levels. So I always forget what grade my kids are in. This is an arbitrary thing. We say, you're in 5th grade. And they have a list of things that they cover in 5th grade. And there's state standards or country standards that they have in order to graduate that grade, right? A curriculum. Traditional schools set these arbitrary timelines, expecting kids to all learn at the same pace and learn the same things. Yet they don't assess the readiness of the individual and I think that's very important because children learn when they're developmentally ready, not when the curriculum dictates it. And I want to set my kids up, as I'm sure you probably do, for a lifetime of learning. And that is not going to happen if we're forcing kids to learn things at a certain quote-unquote grade level, which is completely arbitrary. And what's in the curriculum? Well, that's arbitrary too. You could argue, well, kids should be developmentally ready by this age, therefore this grade level. Yet it's a weak argument, in my opinion, because you could argue it could happen in the next year too, or the year after. Why do they have to learn Ohio history in 5th grade? I don't know. But when I was a kid, that's what we had to learn. It was mandated, as I remember it. Ohio history was in 5th grade, and I had learned to learn the state bird was the cardinal. That's about the only... Oh, no. I learned one other thing that I remember. The carnation is our state flower. Okay. Great. I don't remember anything else because I wasn't interested in it. And why 5th grade when I could have learned that in 4th grade? I don't know. But, the experts say that's when it's best. So that's what was done. And it made me not want to look into anything further about that because I was forced to do it. So I want my kids to be interested. I want them to be curious. That's how you make lifelong learners. And I don't think the education system, the one-size-fits-all approach education system does that for our children. Moving on, I want to talk about the power of cross-disciplinary learning. I think one of the things that we can really excel in when we take our kids out of that one-size-fits-all approach education system and do something like unschooling is we can make real-world connections. In unschooling, subjects naturally blend. Science, art, history, they intersect seamlessly because it's the real world. You don't have to try and connect the dots too hard. It's all connected for you right in front of you. Whereas in school, we're often trying to make those connections, but it's a little more abstract, I believe, for the children. We're going to sit down and learn about this topic, and then we're going to do an arbitrary project that tries to reinforce that learning, yet it has no real-world value. That's called homework, right? And you're going to bring it in and present it to the class then. Okay, talk about boring and make me want to bang my head against the wall. I remember those days. No, in the real world, we can go actually do something. If we wanted to learn about, let's say, money, we might actually have them start a business, sell lemonade, and make some money. Learn how to interact with a customer. Learn how to make a product and then sell it. Learn about pricing. Learn about that's a real world skill, as opposed to in traditional schooling, we're going to have you write an essay, what you would do, or maybe make some kind of science project that has nothing to do with what they're interested in. You could see where I'm going with this, so I won't belabor the point anymore, but I believe The real world connections are much more powerful, and they're much more practical. The practical learning, I think, is one of the things that unschooling really does well. A child building a treehouse learns physics, geometry, teamwork, all these things all at once. And they're super interested in it. And they're learning an actual skill that they could take into the marketplace. Wow, that sounds like an actual education system. As opposed, or maybe I dropped the system from it. It sounds like an actual education, as opposed to the theory of it. And then when you're 26 years old, graduated with a master's degree, you can finally go out in the real world and produce something. No, I'd rather have my kids doing that at 13 or 12 or whatever age that might be. I also think it fosters innovation, because when kids see the connections between different disciplines, they develop the creative problem-solving skills required in order to actually innovate. So I think that's very strong in unschooling, but not the one-size-fits-all education system. Moving on, unschooling builds community connections because, one, you got to find mentors. And if you're not doing this, is where I think the intentional unschooling approach, where you as a parent are taking a very active role, you can find different people to be in contact with your kid as mentors. In fact, I would recommend this as they get older. Unschoolers often learn directly from other people in their fields. Then these people can be experts in their craft, artists, engineers, chefs, real people, not just a teacher talking about it, right? I also think it has a superior socialization, although it's probably more difficult to replicate the quantity you get in a one-size-fits-all education system. But I think it's a superior socialization compared to traditional schooling, because unschooling exposes kids to people of all ages, all backgrounds, and they have to be able to interact with all these different people. You can get your kids involved also in real-world projects. There's community activities like volunteering, participate in local initiatives to teach kids collaboration. You can take responsibilities on within your community, and I think that kind of community connection is real community connection, as opposed to the arbitrary one that's practiced in the education system, where it really isn't real. It's just artifact, or not artifact. It's noise. So I guess you could call it artifact in their life. It's not real. It's manufactured, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Moving on, I want to talk about how unschooling reframes success. When we talk about the education system, they often use grades. You get a report card, and I don't want to define my success in comparison to other people, nor do I want to have my kids frame their success relative to other people. I want them to frame their success in comparison to their old self. And I referenced this earlier. So grades are comparing you to other individuals, or what the teacher wants you to do. What they say is successful, or what the state does, or whoever. It's not about comparing the child to their old self and measuring the growth. It's not about mastery. It's not about passion. I think that success should be about growth, mastery, and developing that passion for something, finding out what you're good at. I think success is getting valuable life skills as well. Traits like, and when we talk about these kind of traits, I'm talking about these meta traits that transfer to any vocation. Traits like adaptability, creativity, self-motivation. I think those matter. The list goes on from there. That matters way more than test scores, in my opinion. I just don't think that a one-size-fits-all approach has the ability to allow your children to be successful. And it would have to take it would have to completely destroy the structure in which we do education right now, the one size fits all, and do an individualized approach, which is going to take potentially more resource, all this stuff, and restructuring how we do everything. I just don't think they're going to be able to get away with it. I don't think they're going to do it. You got to tear it down, build it back up. And the only way I see this happening is through either families doing it on their own, or maybe like through some kind of small school that allows for an individualized approach. Does not, it just looks way different. Either way, I've been thinking about that quite a bit. I think it would be interesting to open up an unschooling, quote unquote, school. You wouldn't call it a school, but maybe you call it a daycare. And it's for school-aged kids who are unschooling. And you just provide the structure, the resources, all these things, and you give, do that 3 days a week. Give parents a break. Maybe they go to work, or maybe they just have some time on their own. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think that would be an actual cool thing to do. I was talking about it with my wife today. It would be an awesome thing to put out there. Moving on, I think the ripple effect that happens on families is significant when you unschool compared to traditional schooling. Again, traditional schooling, you're sending off your kids to someone else, and you're delegating your authority, you're delegating responsibility, you're delegating a lot of decisions like their education, what they eat, these types of things, at least often what they eat, really everything to someone else, okay? So you are only the parent outside of those hours. They're the parent within those hours. I think that can be dangerous. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with doing that type of thing, right? But it's very dangerous. And at the quantity you're talking about, especially with some of the nonsense that goes on out there today across the world, I don't think that I subscribe to... I just think there's too much of a significant risk unless I'm willing to be very involved. I think it can create division within the household. Meanwhile, if I were to have my kids learn at home, do home education, at least if we do it the stress-free way, called unschooling, we'd develop stronger bonds because we're going to go closer through shared experiences, actually doing real-world projects, doing cool things like building a garden or planning trips and all these fun things. It's just going to foster those bonds even more. I also think that parents will also become learners. So you actually have to go back and learn what your kids are learning because they're going to have questions. I always try not to use words like always, these definitive, these words that always and never, that are just so strong. I often hear people say, I could never teach my kids at home because I don't know this. You fill in the blank. Yet they're a productive member of society. The parents saying this is a productive member of society with a job. And it's like, you don't think you have the ability to raise a child to live in the world that you live in? Like, I can understand, like, you might have shortfalls, but you find other people to fill the gaps, or you yourself learn. And I think that's one of those ripple effects that happen in a family when you don't know enough to teach it. For example, I knew some of the history of World War II, but we really went into the history of World War II with all my kids because of because they were interested in it. And there's a lot of impact in the current world today. Why are borders drawn a certain way across Europe? Why are you started getting into some of the political stuff, like why the UN exists. Why does this law exist? What is all these things? You talk about the war in Ukraine, like what's the history of that? Well, we can go back to World War II, right? And talk about how borders were redrawn and all these different things. And, the fall of the USSR and I get to learn it too. And, I knew some of this stuff and I could talk intelligently about some of it, but going back and learning it again, I can talk really intelligently now with my kids. I also think there's a shift in priorities because families often focus on the experiences and valuing the time together. And that shift in priorities, I think, can have lifelong impacts for both the parent and the child. And this is in contrast to, let's say, material success. And I think I want a healthy and whole child. That's my wish, as opposed to just a material, like monetary, what am I trying to say? Like a rich kid. Like I just don't want who has a lot of stuff. No, I want them to be happy overall in so many ways. Lastly, I'm going to talk about just some practical advice. So here's some practical advice to get started. If you're trying to break out of the one-size-fits-all education system, start small. Replace, assuming you're breaking your kids out and you're unschooling them, listen to the episode on deschooling that I had many, in the beginning. It's deschool. I think it's called Deschooling 101 or something similar. You're going to have this period in which they don't want to learn anything. This is just a reset period. That's called deschooling. And what you're going to do is just start small. Start to replace one structured activity with maybe a child-led one and check out the results. Maybe just, this is after you back off for a bit, right? Encourage curiosity and follow your child's interest and provide resources to help support them and just walk along with them, learn with them. Create a rich environment by filling your homes with books, tools, materials, anything that they might be into or stuff that you think they should probably learn. Put it out there. Provide those resources. That's part of your role as a parent. And let go of the fear. Trust that your child's natural curiosity and the necessity, the practical application, or the practical implications of just living a life. There's going to be some necessity to learn some things. Allow them to feel that pressure to learn it, and let them follow their natural curiosity. And they're going to take a path towards growth. And I think that's going to be, I would label it as a success. So, in conclusion, unschooling to me is reimagining education. So education isn't about meeting arbitrary milestones set by the experts out of whatever Ivy League school came up with them. It's about nurturing each child's unique potential. And I really believe in that. Unschooling celebrates individuality and not conformity like the one-size-fits-all education approach does. It empowers kids to thrive in their own way. And my final thought is, imagine a world where every child can follow their passions and grow into the very best versions of themselves. I think that is the lofty promise of unschooling, is that you have the opportunity to be able to do that. You don't have to fight the system in order to get that. That is, to me, worth pursuing, even if I miss college prep calculus as a result, or Ohio history, or I don't know, name something else that you probably don't use ever in your regular life. I don't know. So with that, I'm going to end today's episode. So stay curious, stay unschooled, and stay away from the algebra nightmares. I'll catch you in the next episode. So here's where we roll up our sleeves and bring out the big guns. If you support our mission, then please leave a review. On Unschooled Unleashed, we are talking about using a radical approach to education in today's world, and the more 5-star reviews we have, the more people will feel comfortable with the ideas, strategies, and principles we discuss. It gives legitimacy to our message, and the podcast's algorithm prioritizes us so we can reach more people. You may even have your 5-star review read on our podcast. Before I let you go, I have to pause and say this from the bottom of my heart. Thank you Your presence here is the fuel that ignites this movement. I am incredibly moved that you trust in us enough to click play. You, my friends, are the caped heroes in this story, the guardians of your family's learning journey, and a beacon of hope for your community. Be bold. Do what you think is best for you and your family. Thanks again for tuning in and taking this courageous leap outside of the box for this educational revolution. Welcome to the front line.